Ladies and gentlemen, Binnall of America!
And now, ladies and gentlemen, your host, Tim Binnall.
No commercials, no subscriptions, no network, no rules, and at the end of the day, my friends, no comparison. Welcome back to another edition of BOA The Revival. Very excited about tonight's show. Our guest is Beckie-Ann Galentine, paranormal investigator, social media influencer, and licensed funeral embalmer. And she's been on the Binnall of America revival list pretty much since the beginning, since we brought the show back last October. But it's like, she's such an enormous star, I'm going to be honest, that I'm like, I don't even know. Beckie-Ann Galentine's not going to come on fucking Binnall of America. She's a fucking huge star. But finally, I'm like, I got to try. I got to ask. And we have a lot of mutual friends. We haven't crossed paths. We actually follow each other on Twitter. And so it was like, this is inevitable. I feel like it's inevitable that we gotta sit down and chat here for the show. And I'm going to be putting her over huge over the course of the night, but really, she is transcendent. She's a meteoric star in this field. She's just taken off in an enormous way over the last 4 or so years since the pandemic or so. Since she got on TikTok and became sort of a TikTok star. I don't know. We're going to get into all that, the social media, that whole world, because it's completely foreign to me. As I was saying before we started the show, I'm an old head. I came up on blogs and forums. And then it was like, what is this social media thing? And then it was like this TikTok. What is all that? And as in my capacity for Coast to Coast, I'm always looking for new stories. And I just see Beckie-Ann all over the place all the time. And she's incredibly prolific and mad respect for the hustle. She's just out there all the time doing stuff, producing content all the time. She's part of this new generation of paranormal personalities, if you will. And it's exciting and it's fun, and good friends with our friend Amanda Paulson. So doing some of the similar stuff, producing this content online and doing paranormal investigations. So that's my long introduction here for Beckie-Ann Galentine. As I said, really been looking forward to this conversation for a long time. So let's get down to business. Welcome to the show, Becky.
Hi, thanks for the introduction as a giant burning ball of gas. That was appreciated. Not what I expected, but yeah, it's been an entire journey, meeting lots of cool people and doing lots of things, I guess. I feel like you probably catch wind of like the random things I do that I don't expect. And they're like, can we put you on a tabloid and make you sound insane? And they do. Yeah. Like every couple of weeks, you're probably like sifting through paranormal news and it's like content creator lives with coffins and spiders in her house and it's really exactly haunted. And I'm like, that's not true. I'm not scary, but that's how they like to paint it.
Yeah, those British tabloids, they love you, dude. Every few months I'll be going through and now I know. So it's like, I'll see the headline and I'll be like, oh, the fucking Metro's writing about Beckie-Ann Galentine again. What
they get me every time.
They're obsessed with her.
Well, they'll write. They're like, hey, I saw that. Can we write about it? And what do I have to lose? I already put the content out. But they always write it in a way that's a little more dramatic than I imagined it. Yeah. I'm like, oh, I just bought this like little portrait. And then they're like ghastly haunted pictures with morbid backstory. And I'm like, that's in my house. That's terrifying.
Yeah, exactly. Well, I kind of did a really brief thumbnail on sort of your background a little bit, but it's quite an interesting entree into this field. Talk about your bio, your background. How did all this happen? How did you get mixed up in this field? And as I often say to people who come on the show, there's lots and lots of people who listen to my show, watch your videos, consume your content, they're just happy just to be observers. And then there are folks like you and me who are like, I'm going to get out there and make shit. So I guess tell us a little bit about the bio, the background, and then what prompted you to make that decision to be like, I'm going to get out, I'm going to make stuff. I'm going to be a content producer and really jump into this at both feet.
I feel like I'm one of those people that never had a chance to be not weird. Like I always tell people my growing up sounds like I made it up. I grew up in an antique store. Okay. So my parents have an antique store with dead people's stuff downstairs, and we sift through the recently deceased house. Like we're going through all these old houses and all their personal belongings, and we live upstairs. So the old soul connecting with the past is part of my heritage. And, I hated it growing up. I was embarrassed. I was made fun of relentlessly. They're like, you live in an antique store. And now I can kind of like leverage it. I'm like, I was born in an antique store. So when people try to talk about antiques and tell me I'm wrong, I'm like, I think I'm aware. Like I was literally growing up in the auction houses, and some of the homes you definitely got this feeling. Like my mom always says, this one house, this person was kind of like watching her as she was sifting through the belongings, almost like, what are you doing with my stuff? Like she felt that feeling, like a sensation. And as I grew up, I was really drawn to cemeteries. And I know everyone has their cemetery phase, but it was like, I grew up in a small town, and I just recently opened up about this, but there was this feeling of people would judge you as trying to be something. So they would say like, oh, she's out with her camera. She's trying to be a photographer. She's trying to make something. It's like, again, I always talk about the crabs in the bucket, and I know that's a cliche, but it truly is the mentality of these small towns. They want to embarrass you for trying to do anything bigger or anything outside of going to college, getting a career. So spent a lot of time in cemeteries. And in 2009, I had my first paranormal experience in a cemetery. I was studying biology. I'm learning like clinical laboratory science. So I'm conducting labs and I'm writing lab reports, and I understand the process and how everything works. But on a random day in October, I go to a cemetery and I say, let's go ghost hunting. And I didn't know what that meant. I had a phone, like a flip phone, and a point and shoot camera, a flashlight, and that was it. And we walked 1.5 miles to the cemetery. And I kind of feel like the buildup of walking a mile might have like created this anticipation. And within a few minutes of being there, we were like, this was a silly idea and we shouldn't have tried to do this. Immediately put all our things away. And I said, let's just go home. We were so impatient. Now I spend hours doing this stuff, but turn the flashlight off, turn the camera off, everything's off. It was my brother and my boyfriend at the time, and we're just sitting there waiting to leave when I catch something out of the corner of my eye, and it was this blue sphere, but I couldn't really tell what it was. It was like a flash of light, and then it went from the sky in between two trees. And I would say maybe it was ball lightning, it was a falling star. But then I said, did you all see that? I just saw something out of the corner of my eye. And they said, Becky, be quiet. There was nothing. Like, why are you messing with us? And I said, no, look. And as I point to look, it changes direction. So it's now making a 90-degree angle, and it starts coming in between my boyfriend and I. And I know he saw it too, because he jumps in the opposite direction of me as we separate, and it comes in between us. The air was still, there was no sound. It didn't shine on a surface. It was just the sphere of light. And the next day I went to school and I went to my biology professor and I said, do you believe in ghosts? And he said, no, that none of that's real. And I said, well, I saw something that I can't explain. And my college, I was lucky enough, we had a paranormal society. So it was the Paranormal Society of IUP. And I went and they said, it sounds like an orb and not like a dust orb. Like I saw this and I was like, what does this mean? And I became obsessed after that it became this idea of ghost hunting. It was messy. It was sloppy. It was not scientific. I don't want to take credit for looking like I've been into this longer than I have, because 15 years ago, what I was doing was not professional in any means. It was just, I was just inserting myself in places where I thought I might experience the same thing that I experienced. Right. I was scared, but I wanted to live for that again. I wanted to see it. I wanted to interact with it. And I never did have that experience again. And now years later, I look at it and I realize that happened at the same location that my cousin was killed in a car accident. And I started to think maybe that was him saying hello. When I finally got comfortable enough to articulate how I felt about the paranormal and this journey that I've been on, I told my aunt about that experience. And when I told her, she said, I see Larry. He shows up as blue butterflies. And I thought that the blue butterflies, the blue orb, that's enough for me. I've tried to go back. I've tried to figure it out. I'm okay with accepting that it was ball lightning. If someone told me today it was ball lightning and it still brought me into this interest, that's okay. But that's where my view sort of shifted, but it wasn't solidified enough. How I got to where I am, I went to mortuary school after my friend passed away. This is actually the 6th anniversary of her passing. I was in a punk community in Pittsburgh. We went to a lot of shows, and she was this vibrant ball of light. To be honest, she was in bands. She was funny. She was beautiful. Everyone loved her. And when she died, I felt like, what for? Like, what can I make out of this? So my friend helped me get into a mortuary program, and I started thinking more about what had happened to her. And I graduated summa cum laude. I had a 4.0. I put everything into it, and all I thought is failure means failing Franny. And then the pandemic happened. I was offered a job in West Hartford, Connecticut, and I said, I'm going to Connecticut. That was it. There was no thought. I'm a very impulsive person. If you tell me, can you be in Arkansas tomorrow? I'll make it happen. Like, I just don't like thinking. I like living. So I moved to Connecticut, an hour from New York City, in a pandemic. And I consciously knew that it would be the worst year of my life. And not knowing, when accepting this, that it would not only be the worst year of my life, but also the best at the same time, it's just like a weird way that this fell into place. Yeah. So as I'm working, I can't make friends in Connecticut. I'm isolated. I'm 8 hours from home, and I want to connect with people. I had this feeling of hold out till Halloween. The pandemic will end at Halloween. Obviously that didn't happen, but that was the thought. So I started thinking Halloween every day makes sense to me. So we would have little like Halloween parties. I was buying with just me and my boyfriend. We were having candy and butterbeer and watching Halloween movies and decorating. We brought the decorations out. We're like, what's it matter? There's no societal standards right now. So that was the little bit of joy I was holding on to. So when people saw me doing Halloween every day at the beginning of the pandemic, and I'm not so much like that now, that was the mindset. I was just trying to stay alive and have some hope. And it started with, what if we visited Salem over the weekend? And I went to Salem on my 2 days off. Again, I can't make friends. So I thought serotonin, that's the only drive for all of this. And I went and I just filmed it. And it was the first time I'd ever been in Salem in the summer. It used to have to be this big fall trip because I was from Pennsylvania. And there was lavender in front of the old witch house. And it just was a different experience. And I posted it and it got 500,000 views. Oh, wow. And I didn't know what that meant. I didn't know. I was Googling, what does it mean to go viral on TikTok? Like, I don't understand I was like, how many followers on TikTok is a lot? What am I doing? And then the second video I posted was the Hocus Pocus filming locations, and that got 1 million views. And I never really cared about views or thought about it that way. Some things would get 1,000 and some things would get 2 million. But I posted Holy Land in Waterbury, Connecticut, which is an abandoned Christian amusement park. If you're from New England, you know about it. And people started to say, start telling these stories with your voice. So I started narrating, and I read a comment that said, use your voice, it'll change everything. And within 3 months of telling the stories in my own voice, I was doing like this really breathy, shy narrator voice. I cringe when I look at that content. I'm like, how are people consuming this? But they liked it. They liked that I was delivering what was supposed to be scary in this soft way. But within 3 months, I was on the Western Mass News. I was on CBS News in Pittsburgh, live news interviews. And I look back at that person, I'm like, who is she? Because I was so shy. And as I started inserting myself into these haunted locations, then paranormal investigators, I literally said, I don't want to be like outwardly, like publicly a paranormal investigator. That's not the goal.
Yeah.
And then paranormal investigators kept saying, but we like you and we're bringing you into our spaces. And I didn't understand it because I had my ghost hunting experiences, but I didn't know about the paranormal community. And what I thought, it was a bunch of like pretentious guys in like cargo shorts that were going to tell you exactly what a ghost was.
Yeah,
and
like ghost bros. Yeah.
Yeah. And I really thought that those were the kind of people I was going to encounter. And so I had an aversion to it. Like, I don't want to sit in the dark with a flashlight with a guy that's going to say, oh, that's just dust. Like, I understand and I'm pretty skeptic about stuff. And we all have our own beliefs and we layer them differently. But I just had this vision of men telling me what I was experiencing, and that, made me apprehensive. But as I started getting further and further into it, and it's just like, I couldn't escape. And I meet these people and they're like, that you're one of the next people in the paranormal field. And I'm sitting there saying, how? Like, who are you looking at? Like, specifically, I remember sitting at a Strange Escapes, and Adam Berry said, there's people on TikTok now, and I think that's a big step in the future of the paranormal field. And one of them's here right now. Her name's My Bloody Galentine. And we're in this, like, room of people, and everyone's sitting there. And I'm like, who? Like, this is so surreal. And I remember, like, there was this white feather when I was sitting at dinner, and it came down from the ceiling and it floated. It was sitting on my finger. And I was like, what is this magic? And then someone said, I'm paying for your dinner. It was just a random guy with his family. And I was like, why is everything feeling so weird and like falling into place at this random haunted hotel in Washington, or in Mount Washington? And that was really like the catalyst. From there, it was just, now I'm doing documentaries and I'm failing. I look back at the first one I did and I was like, how am I finding my voice as an investigator? And now I have my own beliefs, and that's like a completely different world to be in. It's one thing to tell other people's ghost stories. It's another to find yourself in a position where you're investigating a place for the first time and telling the story for the first time. And it's 300 years old, and you have that gravity and that weight of altering the perception. So it's been a wild ride. I'm still certainly on it. I don't know where it's going, but it's always somewhere else, and it's pivoting every time.
Yeah, well, like I said, I meant no disrespect with the meteoric rise. I actually was thinking that before the show. I'm like, that doesn't even make any sense because meteors come down. But I'm like, I'll just say it. It sounds good. So, but yeah, like I said, I watched your career just like take off like a rocket, and it's like, wow, this is really something else. I appreciate your insights into sort of the surrealness of that experience, because it definitely sounds really surreal.
Yeah, there have been moments where I'm like, how was I sitting there on the other side watching people give lectures, and then the next year here I am giving my own lecture. And I talk about the decline of Western funeral service and the way we grieve, and how that, changes how we perceive ghosts, and how, we're not grieving like we used to. We sanitize death. And I'm like, how did I even come up with something that's my own thought? I don't know how to explain it, because when you go from being a consumer on social media and you're following these people and you're interested in them, it's a whole different thing when people hang on the words that you say, and they're influenced by you. And eventually I did get to a point where there's a weight to that influence, and it doesn't hit you right away. It hits you when people leave comments like, this video is all I need to know about the existence of the afterlife, or you have changed the way I see things. Or when people tag you and they say, it wasn't until I started watching My Bloody Galentine that I realized ghosts didn't have to be a scary thing. And I'm like, look, I changed someone's belief, and I don't mean to, but I don't want to have that influence sometimes, because I want people to be encouraged to believe what they want. And that being said, I'm a talking board collector. I've been collecting talking boards for 13 years, and that people are very, very opinionated about that. And I tell them, I don't want you to make a decision based on what you see me doing.
Right. Well, what I find interesting, pivot a little bit back to your backstory. your experience as an embalmer, because in the paranormal community, in the ghost community, it's ironic in a sense because there's so many people who are chasing after ghosts, but you have had this experience with the dead. I would venture to guess 99% of the people who are ghost hunters, paranormal investigators, and people of that persuasion have not had even a fraction of the experience that you have. I mean, I've seen a dead body at like a funeral, but certainly, I mean, if somebody encounters a dead body, unless they're like, a soldier or emergency room guy or, the various jobs, your average Joe Sixpack, maybe that happens to them like once in their life and it changes. But you were around death and dead people all of the time during this time when you were working as an embalmer during the pandemic. You eventually left the job a few years ago. Once this whole thing became just untenable, you had to, you were being called to the paranormal. You had no choice. But I guess reflect on that a little bit, because I was reading an interview that you did, and you said, I apply the mortuary ethics to my paranormal content. And I thought that is so refreshing, and it's so informed in a way that nobody else can bring to the table.
So I know that you've been around a time or two and are able to understand how many ghost stories start with a dead body, right? A dead body left behind, or a disturbed dead body, or they died in there. And until you're embalming and you're going on these transfers, every single house has had 4 or 5 dead bodies. You're taught in mortuary school that death is an irreversible cessation of life.
Right.
Yet your mortuary professors will whisper ghost stories that they've had working at these funeral homes. We're taught that cemeteries aren't haunted because we're not haunted by bodies. But at the same time, wouldn't the person be haunted by the experience of watching the end of the life as they know it, as that person's lowered into the ground? Right. What about the mourners? What about the rituals of the people who visit those grave sites? I've had so many things that have changed my perception. And I've realized that, let's take Waverly Hills, for example, how many people have died there, and it's the sheer amount of death. And it's like, but do you realize we're walking on cemeteries? And that's another thing that came up. People say, oh, you walk on graves. And I'm like, do you know how many grave sites are actually fictions? And they run lawnmowers over them. When you think about respect. So when I entered the field, I thought, if a family were sitting there, even if that person died 300 years ago, and they were watching what I was doing and saying, would they be offended by that? Right. So I think about that. And I don't think that anyone's, methods are better than anyone else's. I certainly don't think that, but that is what's on my mind. I want to be respectful and human. And I also can acknowledge the existence of potentially non-human entities and other things that are just energy. And it's not all, it may be none of that is human spirits. But at the same time, I bring that empathy into it. So I have I almost overthink, because I'm like, well, I understand that they may not be humans at all, but I also have this perception of how I interact with the world around me. And that's going to reflect in the way that I investigate, and sometimes I don't even realize, because I've become so comfortable with death and I walk comfortably with it that I forget that other people have not had that experience. And so I'll say things so casually and say, oh, well, they died. And everyone's like, oh, that's so sad. And I'm like, well, everyone dies. And then they take you out on a cot by the dumpster with gloves because they don't want to touch you because they think you're going to get a disease. And it's so interesting where, you do get desensitized, but I will say that entering the field of the embalming field, I was concerned that I would end up callous. And a lot of them are. You're taught to not feel. And after I left, it was like walking into a brick wall. I realized in that moment, I really went through a lot in the pandemic. Nobody is supposed to see a garage converted into a cooler because they needed 100 extra spaces for bodies. Nobody's supposed to have 12 bodies delivered to the funeral home. And so there was that, and the idea of being just a number and what dignity was, because a lot of our ghost stories, when we look back at the paranormal field, it starts with a woman waiting for her husband by the ocean side, a woman searching for her lost children. There was a death of a soldier. There's so many stories that begin with grief or the idea of desecration or somehow related to the way we mourn and we grieve. Yes. And that's where I got with this. And then I thought, well, what about the person who died in the pandemic by themselves and nobody got to see them and say, we're ready to let you go? And they die alone in this nursing home or on an iPad, FaceTime, and nobody can see them and they're put in a bag. And we hope, I'm going to be honest and completely candid, there were so many instances, and they did get publicity, especially in New York during the pandemic. There are people in the wrong caskets. There were people in the wrong clothes. There were people that I would be willing to bet that there are people out there that were cremated and swapped. I'm not saying it's everyone. I'm saying maybe one out of a million, but it was happening. And
in the frenzy of what was going on. Yeah.
Yeah. And it was exhausting for the people working. I don't fault them, but what does that become when your legacy is just a number? They've all been filed away as losses of the pandemic, and people said, oh, we'll put the funeral off for 6 months. We'll put it off for a year when we can gather again. And then that time didn't come and those funerals never happened. So a lot of that came up. And I think about it with the, I like to compare Waverly and the tuberculosis and that going on to what we experienced with COVID. And when we're experiencing it as it's happening, we're not really processing it with that lens. But I was thinking about it a lot and how, they look at, a lot of people speak about those doctors as if they were ghouls and ghoulish. And that's how we like to tell the stories of all of the experiments that were going on. But we were doing it too. We were putting people on ECMO, and that doesn't mean they were ghouls. They were doing what they had with the information that was present. And in the beginning, that was nothing. Yeah.
Oh, you mean the doctors like trying to treat the COVID patients? Yeah.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. They were like, well, I hope this works, and they did their best. It's best practices.
Yeah, they didn't know. Yeah, they were trying to figure out how to save these people who were dying of some crazy disease that people had just started studying once they discovered it. It was I liken it to an alien invasion on the show. Like, if you ever want to see what an alien invasion would like, for all the ugliness of it all, that's what an alien invasion would look like.
I used to leave my house through the fire escape because I was afraid of using the common entrance in the beginning of COVID. I was like, oh, I can't go down there. There's other people. But I moved out of there, but I was so nervous and I was shopping with gloves. So
yes, how about like when you get home and you like wipe the groceries down?
Lysol.
I got the baby wipe. I'm wiping off my Lucky Charms. It's like, who knows what got on the box. It was wild. It was a really strange time. It was, I feel like people have they don't want to really, I don't want to say reminisce. They don't even want to revisit it. They want to block it out. And I mean, I don't want to get too political, but look, we got an election coming up. The asshole trying to get back in was the asshole who fucked it all up. So, let's not forget about what happened in that fucking pandemic for us.
Oh, yeah.
Because it was a bad scene, man. It was a bad scene. But I think everybody's trying to move on. And it's like, no, we really shouldn't move on. It's a little too recent, too soon, as they say.
I think the news inundated us with all the information about it to the point people were sick. They're like, I want to see something other than COVID. And that's fine. But I think what we're talking about right now is good because that was an experience. And again, we've pushed it so far out of our minds. I remember my heart stopping the first time I found out I wasn't wearing a respirator when I touched a decedent who had passed from COVID and they didn't document it. And I was like, I'm going to get COVID. That's it. And then I got COVID and I got very, I got very sick, but I saw whole families and that's what frustrated me. I was like, not to talk about this too much, but I was watching people at home say it wasn't real while I was watching entire families get wiped out. And it was a bad time. But again, I think about these historical pandemics. And there's a lot of ghost stories that start with yellow fever and Spanish flu, and you know, that's where I was like, these are our ghost stories happening in real time.
Yes,
100 years from now, people are going to say,
just thinking that, because y'all always hear these old ghost stories, and it's like, where are the new? It's like the old, like, where are the new classic rock songs? Like, where are the new ghost stories? It's like, we got a shitload of them that just happened, and we'll probably start to experience them and see them and understand them as time goes by.
Yeah, they're going to be like that house on South 5th Street where the whole family died in the coronavirus pandemic. And everyone's going to be like, oh, they died there. Oh, and they haunt it to this day. And they didn't even have treatment or vaccines yet. And it's going to be like, no. Hear the scary music.
Well, you talked about, so you left the funerary gig and you became this social media star as this thing picked up and everything. I guess there's so much. It's a completely foreign world to me. I find it fascinating. When we had Amanda Paulson on, we got into it a lot. It's like I have so much respect for the hustle, but also the you have to have a thick skin to deal in that fucking world, because there's comments. I always say I never read the comments, but in order to really kind of make it in that scene, you have to be interactive and read the comments, and people can be really awful and also uplifting, of course. Being
popular on social media is like being given the platform of a celebrity minus any bodyguards, protections, PR team, and you're just on your own because you're catapulted overnight. And people have opinions on everything. Everything you've ever done, it's out in the open and they will find it. It doesn't matter what dark place you were in your life when you made a choice, they are going to find it and you're going to be splayed wide open for everyone to look at. So, you know, I didn't realize you're not given the choice. It's not like, would you like to proceed before you post this? Like maybe one day there will be like a cigarette pack warning that says, before you post on social media, you're about to be completely ripped apart for everything. I'm a cautious person. I've always been, I grew up as a gifted student. So I have this idea of perfectionism and it's almost to a fault. Actually, it is to a fault. And so when I was on social media, I wanted my voiceovers to be what I thought were perfect at the time. And then I would have people saying, you have SpongeBob teeth and your voice makes me want to punch a wall. And I got used to those. They hurt, but it's like, I can't do anything about my teeth. I can't do anything about my voice, but I think, just to stop you there, what I always think to myself when I really don't read reviews or comments at all anymore. So people can say terrible things about me all they want. But when I would read them, it's just like, look, man, nothing you can say is as hard as the shit that I think about myself. Mm-hmm. Like, so whatever you think, I've already gone there, bro. I know all of my faults. I grapple with them every day. So fuck you. I don't need, you're coming at me, with old news. That's kind of how I try to take it, because I'm kind of like you in a perfectionist way. It's like you strive to work hard. You do the best you can. So it's like, and no one's harder on myself than me. Exactly. And, the first time I knew not to read the comments was when BuzzFeed wanted to partner and make a compilation of my videos. And I read one comment and it said, I stopped listening when she said she liked to use more organic methods to investigate. I'm like, how is that even a polarizing comment? Yeah, but that's awesome. I realized those comments aren't for me to read and people are going to have opinions. And then the other time, this was the last time I read anything on a public site. Daily Mail did a feature and someone said, she's hot, but she's nuttier than squirrel poop. I was like, wow. And actually, Ireland's a little different. Okay. And they have opinions. And I was featured in something that said, mortician leaves their job to become a ghost hunter. And I didn't even know it was published. That's the other thing. I don't know when people are making these articles. People say, oh, she pays for them to write them. No, people just write
Yeah, no,
garbage. They don't care.
Yeah, you gotta, as a saying in the business, you gotta feed the goats, like the cartoon goat in the old cartoons. They just keep eating the trash and everything like a thing. That's how the media works. You gotta have something all the time. And I can totally see where writers have go-tos. I have them like flat Earth and stuff that I'll write about whenever I see something. So I'm sure like the people in the UK tabloids are like, every like week or two, they're like, just check Beckie-Ann Galentine. I'm sure she has something we can put out there. She's got some kind of haunted doll or whatever. It's fine. That'll cover us for the day.
So I had a message request and it said, "Hey, I'm from Ireland and I wanted you to know we love you. Don't read the comments." And I was like, "What are you talking about?" And they're like, you're getting eaten alive. So then I look and it was so bad. It was like, oh, so she's unemployed now. And that's the other thing is they never want to call me a content creator because obviously that's my income source, not ghost hunting. Nobody makes money from that. And so they say ghost hunter. And it's just like, oh, I bet she hasn't found it. And that one was really mean. But it's just, you have to deal with it. And unfortunately, I am reaching an era of, I'm biting back, not for the I do answer sometimes the comments on like the tabloids because I think they're shocked because they're like, oh, I thought I was just
she'll never see this. Yeah, they're like, yeah.
And I saw it. So and then sometimes they'll say, oh, sorry, like I didn't mean it, or like I think what you're doing is a great thing after they realize they have eyes on them. Yeah. But and I know that's petty, and I know I have better things to do with my time. But sometimes I like to be like,
Yes.
So it's at a point though where I've realized that the same way people think and feel entitled to take things out on minimum wage employees working in food and retail, they're starting to do this with content creators, and they don't feel any overwhelming way about us as people, but unfortunately they look for something in the comment and they'll say, oh, did you fart at 37 seconds? Or, you're so dense. Like, I'm not joking. People will pick up anything and they will rip it apart. Like, you watch a movie and you don't say, but what happened at, 27 minutes and 13 seconds that character looked that weird way. They'll screenshot you. They will post stories calling you an a-hole. It's way worse than people realize. Yeah. And they tell us to just deal with it. Tell us to just deal with it. I'll be completely transparent with what I'm going through right now. People are angry because I used to have a vintage store. And when I did the vintage store, I would dress up as different decades. So one day I do 1950s, one day I do 70s, one day I do 80s. Right. And now people are using this to fuel a conspiracy theory that I have a loose sense of identity and that I steal people's identities to try and become those people. It's really bizarre. And I defended myself for a long time. I'm like, it's just a vintage store. Like, I thought I was just playing dress up, essentially. I would tease my hair. I was looking at old 80s magazines, and sometimes I would do like a 70s thing. And then sometimes I would do
it was just something fun you were doing. You were doing for fun.
Yeah, but now that means I was inauthentic because I went to mortuary school at the age of 27, and I have a loose sense of identity, and I'm just going to grab on someone else and stalk them. And I look back, I'm like, I wasn't even thinking anyone in mind when I was doing that stuff, and I never privated it because I'm not embarrassed. I love every single walk of my life. I grew up in an antique store. I think it makes sense, but that's what I'm saying. Like, I've used my platform to. Like, the second I realized the gravity of my platform, I was like, I want to pay into the communities that have been harmed by these stories that have involved marginalized people. And I think people want to rip that away from you. They're like, you're not really nice. You're just pretending to be nice so people think you're nice. It's like weirdest projections, and they will hyper-analyze every single thing that you do. And, I collect portraits of people, and somehow that's controversial because they say it's weird to have portraits of people you don't know on your wall. And it's like, should they go in the trash? Like, what do you people want? And there's no answer. There's always going to be some opinion you have to deal with.
Oh my God. I'm aghast. This sounds horrifying in a sense. It really does. Yeah. Wow, Jesus. Oh my God. And I suppose there's like, what is beyond what you're doing and what Amanda Paul is this like other people? How many other people are doing these things? Are they all like competing with each other and everything?
So I think that
like how many of these creators are out there, if you will?
There's probably 20 of us that are like a circle of people who are all similar with similar ideals, kind of like aligning with the same people in the paranormal community. But there's certainly like a crowd of people that I would say, especially like newer ones that are kind of like on the up and everyone's talking about them. You know, you got obviously Amanda Paulson, but also that witch up the holler who does like Appalachian spooky content. Joshua Darren, you know, he does the story times from the South. There are certain people that everyone's kind of like, oh, I've got my eye on them and they're doing really well. They're doing best practices. There's no perfect right or wrong way with the paranormal, but there's best practices that I think we can do to be as good as we can, or apply as much due diligence as we can. So there's about 20 of them. A lot of us are in a creator chat, and
interesting.
We stick together, but a lot of people are having similar experiences where it's worse than ever with the comments, especially on Instagram, and people will misunderstand you on purpose. They're like, how can I apply a misunderstanding to this?
Yes.
You know, I was like, I bought a light fixture from Waverly Hills, and they're like, that's not a light fixture. It's just the globe that goes over the light fixture. Like, they will find something.
God.
Or I have.
What is wrong with people? What is fucking wrong with people?
My favorite.
Oh my God! I barely use social media, and this is exactly why. But
yeah, it's awful, and I have a lot of. I can't knock it because I benefit so much from it.
Yeah,
but at the same time, you know, I have old headstones that were being used to hold up a barn. Now, this is the worst controversy. And they were being used as cinder blocks to hold up a barn. And the family now has joint headstones. So the other old headstones, they didn't need anymore. And someone 100 years ago was using them for this. Like, they had been decommissioned for decades. I buy them from an antique store, and I share about that because I believe that was someone's monument. People grieved at that monument, and it meant something to them. So I said, oh, I have someone's graves in my house. Those aren't graves. Those are gravestones. And I'm like,
oh God.
Oh, you knew exactly what I meant. And it's just constant, and it's nonstop. They will nitpick you. I just had someone the other day correct a word that I used, and I was like, yeah, but I think like the big picture came across. But when you write a book and you have a typo, nobody says anything. You know, like that would be like getting an email after doing a TV show or like the weather for the day, and then someone saying, I noticed that when you said this sentence, but on social media, they have too much access to you. It is a fault, 100%. It is our identities. Social media started with your private page, and now it's like, how many people can I bring into my private page? How do I keep my private page being mine without it turning into this? And we have our close friends stories. We have some spaces, but it really almost feels like a bit much sometimes. And I lay awake at night and I think about that. And then on top of it, as if we don't get enough garbage on social media, then you have people in the paranormal community. Oh, these content creators are just doing it for fame. They're just doing it for attention. It's inauthentic. They're doing it the wrong way. They're not real. They'll never be taken seriously. She's an influencer. That's my favorite. And when I'm introduced, nobody wants to say paranormal investigator. They say social media influencer. And I'm like, not that it's a bad term in my world, but I know what you mean. And my friend, he's never introduced as an influencer, even though he has 3 million followers on TikTok. He's considered a ghost hunter or paranormal investigator, but I'm an influencer. So it specifically blankets women. So
I was going to say, that's because you're a woman. Right.
And because I do my makeup, or like I'm not selling anything. Sometimes if someone aligns with me, I wish people could see the stuff that I say no to, and then they'd say, wow, like she has a lot more integrity than I thought. But what I'm realizing, and something that has been resonating with me so much the past few weeks, is you cannot inject your ego and your perspective of someone's intention without specifically asking them. It's so easy to say, she posted that to bother me. She did this because she was trying to do this. And when it reaches the point where, and this is really traumatic, but the other day someone said that I was never actually friends with my friend that passed away, and that I dressed like her because I wanted to steal her boyfriend after she died. And
Jesus Christ.
I am still like shook about that. And I went through and I spent like, I can't believe someone said that on a public platform. And I went through and I spent hours reading old texts between my friends until I came across this one where she said, that's what friends do. And I thought, even if she said behind my back that we weren't friends, she told me we were friends. And in my world, in my experience of her, we were friends. And the fact that some mean person wants to rob me of that, who's never met me in person, just had me so disturbed. I couldn't believe it. And that's what it is. And it's nastiness. And it's not just randoms on social media. It's the content creators you befriend, hoping that you can lift them up and hold them up to you, and you want to bring people with you, and you want to introduce everyone and give them good references, only for them to say that they think you copied an idea. And that's the other thing, is copying. We're all consuming from the same, 20, 30-year-old ghost stories. We're going to go to the same places, and there's so much, and it's like there's room for everyone. But it was really just kind of like a villain era for a little bit with social media. And I got dragged. I'm trying not to talk about this, but I was really dragged this week. And one of the complaints was that I went to a location after talking about it with someone, but I didn't go with them. And I'm like, I don't know you.
Jeez.
I had one conversation with you.
This seems like so much drama, dude. I said before, like I've watched your career take off, and I mean, anyone, I'll be honest, it's like I watched that, I'm like, oh shit, man, that would be fun. I wish the world fell in love with Binnall. But it's like, I'm listening to what you're telling me, and it's like, world, leave me alone. World, just leave me alone. Let me be Binnall on my own.
I typed up a quit letter this week, and then I was like, no, this isn't fair. I know my truth. But when you hear so many times that you're a bad person, you're delusional, you're schizophrenic, you're all of these things, you steal people's identities, your dead friend isn't actually your friend, all because you had one opportunity they thought they deserved more than you, or they felt that you stood in the way. They will do anything. People are so unable. I'm like heated talking about this.
I know. I want to ask you this, and I mean this with empathy. Do you have someone you can talk to about this, like a therapist or close friend?
Yeah.
So much to carry around.
Yeah. So I do have a regular therapist.
My heart is breaking here, and I'm cringing, and I'm just like, oh my God. Like, girl, get out of the house. Out of the house. I'm getting out. Jeez.
My only thing that I'm telling you this to you is when people sit there, and if you're in a circle, and I'm sure you have been, where they say stuff about the content creators and how they're not serious. But remember what I'm telling you. But people are people are unable to look at something and say, that person didn't get in my way to get that. They want, instead of being happy for you, they think that you somehow injected yourself in their path and took something from their hand. And I always explain, I don't think the opportunities line us all up and pick the one with the most followers. They go for the person who fits best, whatever that may mean. And sometimes it's the most followers, and sometimes it's the most kind, and sometimes it's the prettiest. It does not matter.
Sometimes it's the most professional.
I'm going to be 100% honest, and I'm not like ashamed of this. I posted it on my close friend stories, but I literally spent the last 2 days in like a hospital for my anxiety because this was just,
oh my God.
This was too, imagine being told your dead friend isn't your friend, all because of social media. So anyway, enough about the negative aspects.
Yes.
We can keep pretending that it's a Cinderella story. And I've had so much fun in the paranormal community because I've met amazing supportive people, but it's never the people who are super successful tearing other people down. It is never the people who have a body of work. It's people that somehow either it's an insecurity or they have a hollow body of work, meaning they've just inflated themselves on social media, but they're not doing full-length documentaries or writing books or doing things outside. You have to mix the medias. You have to like go to different platforms. So that, you know, I've always been like a real person without shame my entire life. So I think it's okay to talk about that kind of thing. But I think that people don't realize what it's like when your entire life has a price tag on it.
Yeah, no, this has been eye-opening in a serious way. And it's been enlightening. If people could see the video tonight, my eyes have been like saucers multiple times.
It's disturbing.
Recounted this stuff. Yeah. And I guess I'm just sort of like a liberal old head in a way of the paranormal. Yeah. It's like, this is just how it works, dude. It's like there was zines and then there were like books and blogs and then there were podcasts and now it's video and it's TikTok and YouTube. And someday it'll be something else. It'll be 3D interactive. You put yourself in the thing and you're walking around. I don't know, but this is how it happens. So why hate on the people that are doing the cutting edge stuff that are right on the cusp of how the content is consumed? It's it's like get on board or get the fuck out of the way or just shut the fuck up. That's the three options, and it's depressing, especially to hear from people in the community. It's like if you don't want to be on TikTok, you can't be on TikTok. Like me, I don't begrudge. It's like I'm really envious. I'm like, oh, I wish I could get into that, but I just can't. So it's a bummer to hear that kind of pushback too.
My first lecture actually was in front of paranormal investigators. And I said, I know you all hate on TikTokers or you think that it's a bunch of fake content. However, who's supposed to contrast that fake content if you don't want to show up there? There's no accountability. Right. So people can sit there and say that their haunted doll that they're tying a string to is moving all the time if nobody else is showing up with authentic content. And I've never really been tempted to fabricate anything. And I've actually started blocking people who I know are, because I'm like, I don't even want to see this. I don't want to be, there's some people that are not rehabable as far as that is.
Right.
And I'm like, but I've realized that now it's 4 years in and it's starting to build and layer and people go, oh, I've been watching you for 4 years now. I know you're not going to lie to me. But in the beginning, I didn't even know. I just knew that I didn't want to be in that realm. And it's wild because I have watched people go down a dark path where they started telling ghost stories. They got a little bit into investigating and all of a sudden I wasn't there, but I can tell that this is, dolls don't move like that. The dolls don't just, move constantly and in its string. And
they get desperate for content. So they have to start. Yeah.
But it's starting to level off with that. In the beginning, when there was no one showing up and nobody took the platform seriously, those people were thriving. And now, people are starting to show up and say, hey, I'm an investigator. This is not how it works. But it's been an interesting shift because TikTok was definitely the Wild West in the beginning.
Right.
And then, my friend, Kalani, he started doing live investigations. And that was when it was like, oh, he can't cut this up. He can't do anything to make this something else. And watching him, and now he does food reviews, but he still loves the paranormal. But I will say one thing that we've come to terms with social media, you post and you get 1 million views in 1 or 2 days, and then people forget about it and then they move on. Right. What's viral? And he and I both have had conversations where it's like the capacity in which you're expected to investigate in order to stay relevant on social media is not transferable to the field. if you want to have diligence in the field, and if you want to be able to review the evidence and actually consider what you're putting out there, you cannot be making videos every single day, because there are multiple angles. I think back on videos I posted and I thought, ooh, maybe I should have gone back and looked at that a little bit more with more scrutiny, but it's now 2 years old or whatever. But because it's this demand, and if you don't post for a few weeks, they forget about you. They absolutely do. And, you know, I may have 800,000 followers on TikTok, but if I don't post, I'll get 1,000 views.
Yeah.
And same with that. It is definitely designed to make it so you have to keep pushing to be relevant, rather than if you do something that cements you in film or TV, people don't forget about that. So we have a lot more pressure. There's no idea of like, is there going to be a retirement? It feels like we're going to have to be creating till we die, or
you're like a freelancer. Yeah.
So it's a different sphere.
It's a living.
I think not only with the content creator's perspective, but I think just in general, people need to be kinder. I think we need to start getting away from like just tagging people and saying like, this is the worst person ever. And I'm guilty of it. We've all called someone out. We've all done that. But people don't understand that we are not just talking heads. And that is the one thing that TV people and book people don't have. They don't have to sit and read everything people said about their character the same way. It's like everything we do with, if you put out an episode of a TV show, you're not going to have to read a comment for every single thing that people thought about it. It's just kind of like, hey, good episode. Or, you know, like, hey, I don't really know about that evidence. They might ask questions, but with us, it's just really everything and nothing's off the table. Like the schizophrenic comments really just get me, because it's like, you can say you don't believe in ghosts, but like you just diagnose someone or whatever. It's just they don't think about it.
Sounds insane. Yeah. Have you thought about life after TikTok? They talk about getting rid of it. I don't know if that's even going to happen, but have you thought about any bigger aspirations beyond this?
You know what is interesting? Am I on the internet forever? Like, am I out there forever? Is there a version of me from 2020 that was working and breathing through a pandemic and just experiencing the paranormal field for like the first time? Is that version of me is now in a whole different dimension? I don't even own it anymore. I see some of those videos pop up that are 3 years old that a news article shares as if it happened yesterday. And it's like this perpetual idea of yourself. So it's like, I think in some ways my TikTok has taken a life of its own. Right now, I'm focusing on the lectures that I've been doing and have on the horizon for, you know, the fall. And I'm trying to get together a book of the stories of, you know, unusual burials and different ways that people have grieved throughout the history, and making that happen for myself. So I'm hoping to have a legacy outside of that platform. And honestly, if I could leave tomorrow, I definitely would. There are projects that I'm talking about, and I get so much more gratification from something feeling like a whole. I will say, like, TikTok in some ways always feels like this finite media that it's not long enough. It lacks nuance. It lacks context. And with the paranormal, like, how can you make a paranormal experience in 30 seconds, 15 seconds, whatever? So it starts to feel like a throwaway in a way. And I've moved beyond that. And I think it got to a point where it's like, okay, you're someone we want in the public eye, but maybe that's not the capacity. And I don't know how that they're going to ban it. Like, for what? It's just like so it's silly, but I hope like to have a legacy that is not just social media, because in some ways, as much as my work matters and it changes perceptions, it feels like it's not more. Even if I put a thought out there, they're not going to hear the branches off in the discussion. They get a fragment of what it is.
Yeah. Well, I think you're going to have a tremendous legacy, so I wouldn't even worry about that. I think just from this conversation tonight, you really tell it like it is, and I really like that. So I appreciate your candidness and honesty and introspection about all this stuff. We'll move into it's not a lighter topic, I guess, but it's something I gleaned from one of your social media posts. You did actually quite a bit on this. It was like a thread, and then there was a video. Like I said, respect the hustle, man. It's you really did a lot on this. So the Oddfellows skeletons. I hate to throw something kind of out of left field at you, but I feel like this is something that you'll be able to conjure up and tell us about. What are these skeletons that I could tell people, but I would butcher it and kind of ruin the whole setup. So can you recount this, I don't know what you call it, a story or a trend, or I don't know what you would call it.
This starts all the way back in like 2010. Sci-Fi releases a series called Oddities, and I'm sure you may be familiar with this, but it created this movement of an oddities community, which I kind of hang in between both the paranormal and oddities community.
Yeah.
I collect weird funerary things, but I also, don't collect human remains. What happened as people started to get more into the oddities is there became the status war to have certain items in your collection. One of the most coveted things is a human skeleton. And what a lot of them feel as though if it were a retired Oddfellow skeleton with nowhere to go, it's okay to own. And I had brought up this conversation about these skeletons they are not former Oddfellows members. Oddfellows, every lodge has usually an older coffin. I'm looking at one in the corner of my room right now that I'm giving this from. And usually that coffin had a real human skeleton in there, or they did paper mache. And it was this ritual that made them encounter their mortality as, part of being a member of the lodge. And there's a secret society. They're very secretive. And a lot of these things are considered relics. In fact, many Oddfellows members feel as though these should not end up in the hand of the private collectors, but in the Oddfellows. And my perspective is we need to repatriate these.
Yeah.
So in order to kind of fizzle out the defense of they have nowhere to go, they're nobody, I want to remind people the origin of these skeletons. And that's when I started deep diving, because I got into a little bit of a beef. It was my fault, but so I saw someone on TikTok and they were putting keychains in a human skull, a medical prepared skull, which opened up. And I said, I understand having a custodian or a steward hang on to one of these items, because I shouldn't even say items, human remains. And if you donate them to the coroner's office in order for them to investigate the origin, they are going to put it on a shelf and that person is just going to be in limbo. But if you can't just bury them because they no longer have a death certificate because they died 150 years ago and there was no formal system to initiate medical specimens. And there was only one way to really get medical remains back then, and that was either grave robbing or, taking them from a disadvantaged member of the population. So these Oddfellow skeletons, I dug up no pun, I dug up this article.
You got me on that one.
Yeah, it wasn't intentional. I dug up an article that mentioned the origin of these skeletons and actually laid it out scientifically. And that's what I was starting to try and relay to people is I understand for a while we were comfortable. So 10 years ago, we were comfortable with retired medical specimens because the idea then was those no longer have a use. They did their life in the medical field and there's nothing to do with them. And I'm more on the side of, are you comfortable with the idea of that potentially being a person who was enslaved? Because who in their right mind, as a white person, would feel comfortable owning an enslaved person's skeleton on display in their house, posing with it for pictures, putting keychains in it? And that was the conversation. So when you look into this article, these Oddfellows ritual skeletons they were using as a function of their, goodwill, they were using indigenous people from burial mounds. A lot of times these medical specimens were coming for wherever the medical sources could find them. So they were actually going to, let's say, an asylum, I guess we would say psychiatric facility today, but they were lunatic asylums then. And they would bury people in plots with just numbers, no names, no dignity. And they would take them from there, or impoverish people. It was not a dignified way. And I think we give ourselves almost like a euphemism of the past, because we say, oh, they were people who donated their body to science. They didn't do that then. That might have been a fraction. But most people, including a story I love to bring up, I don't love the story, but the man Fortune. And my friend John Mills, who's a researcher in Connecticut, who does research into the lives of the enslaved, did a lot of work to restore dignity to Fortune. Fortune worked with a broken back. He was an enslaved man who had a wife and kids, and this doctor, Preserve Porter, he was making him work, and one day Fortune slipped and fell, and he broke his neck, and he passed away. And the doctor, instead of giving him a dignified burial site for his family to be taken care of, the issue was back then, at this time that Fortune passed, it was illegal to do anything undignified with human remains unless they were an enslaved person. So the people who were enslaved did not get dignified burials. So he boiled the person in his house, boiled the remains, and took those skeletal remains of Fortune and passed them through privileged hands. So already white people are now passing them along, getting their doctor's degrees, and Fortune never got a proper burial until he finds himself in the 70s on display at a museum in Connecticut with, quote, slave tools. And finally, someone was like, that is not dignified. There's actually postcards with Fortune's remains in the tools that were displayed. It's absolutely disgusting. And so John, and with some help of some other people, they get him buried at Waterbury Cemetery. They open a plot for him and they bury him, and they put a headstone. And that's where I've had people reach out to me. Hey, I bought a human skeleton 10 years ago when we thought it was okay, but we're actively kind of clashing at a change. And there's multiple angles. One of my closest friends has a giant collection of human remains, and I get a lot of heat for that. But at the same time, people say, oh, did you talk to Ryan about this? And we've had conversations. What are you supposed to do if the only way to repatriate them is to mail them? You can't just mail a head in a box and send it overseas. And, at what point, and at what point is sitting at a shelf in a government office less dignified than having a human that says, I love these things and I have these things? So the Oddfellows skeleton, deep dive was just one fragment of what's happening with basically people owning human remains. I think it's a way of having control of something that it's technically bad, because if you said you had an arm or a human foot in your house, people would be shocked. But if, it's this retired medical skeleton, then it's okay. It's like this, in psychology, they talk about things that they do. Like, you want to punch someone, but you can't do it. So you do kickboxing. Like, it's like the socially acceptable way to explore something that's actually really disturbing. But what happened is so many people got obsessed with the status and making money from this that they started, grave robbing overseas. So a lot of the crypts overseas and Potter's Fields, that if you see a human skull that has the teeth missing and a weird patina, it's probably just fresh from the field and it's not retired medical. Jesus. And the other thing that I love to talk about that somehow people walked away with just getting probation is the incident that happened at the medical schools recently. And they were going in. A professional like myself was totally comfortable with letting people into the science donations to just cut off whatever body parts they wanted and to sell for collections. Yeah. And I think it comes down to consent. And that's where we're seeing museums pull things away. The Mooner Museum is pulling things. Pittsburgh, they pulled, it was actually a sculpture, but the sculpture had a human skull. I think it was a representation of Geronimo Don't get me if I'm mistaken, but it had a skull underneath the display. So they removed it, and they're deciding, like, at what point does consent not matter? Because people can consent today as much as they're able, but if they didn't consent 300 years ago, one of my favorites, I'm kind of like rambling because I think about this so much.
Interesting.
Yeah, one of my favorites is there was a woman they called the soap lady. Like, tell me that's not the least dignified thing you've ever heard. And they put her on display at the Mutter for years. And the story was she was a yellow fever victim. And they were kind of digging and they found her, and a guy left her on the porch of the Mutter, and they just put her on display. No questions asked. Like, oh, this person died several hundred years ago. So we're seeing a lot of the ethics. We are at the heat of it. It is the peak of human remains ethics. And in my perspective, I don't think it's okay if you're not an institution to own remains, especially if it's not someone of your culture. And we're finding out how many of these medical skulls were obtained in New Zealand from the Maori tribe. You can't own stuff like that. But because they put, like I said, like a blanket term over it, it's happening. So that's where my mortuary background comes in. And I do get kind of harsh with people. And that's why people are trying to kind of cancel me and say I was a bully, because I think that these people deserve dignity. Someone sent me a human arm, and I got a hold of a cemetery. I got a hold of a cemetery and I said, can we bury this? Because it's not cool to put it in a shadow box anymore. Like, and they're taking like hot glue and some crystals and moss, and they're putting it on someone's remains. But then what's it matter anyway? We're all going to be dust. So it's like, maybe the point is moot, and maybe I'm just exploring this for no reason. It's
a whole interesting ethical idea. I don't know. I covered a story a couple of years ago that was like they had a mummy in a funeral home in Pennsylvania, I believe.
Oh, yeah, they just buried him.
Yeah.
Yeah,
they buried him on the anniversary of the town's city's anniversary. Yeah. So there seems to be this movement towards that. And I had a question. Oh, go ahead. You had a light bulb went off, so go ahead.
Yeah, you want to know some hot tea?
Always.
You know, in West Virginia, those mummies are still on display, and they were trans-Allegheny lunatic asylum patients that were sold to a rogue scientist who comes up with his own embalming solution to mummify them. And I never knew it.
Story,
Yeah. And, you know, I always thought that they were someone that they found accidentally preserved in an attic. I didn't know the story. And then I started looking, and it was these two women, one older and one was 17 years old. And then there was a baby, and they were sold to this guy. And now the Historical Society of this town has these two mummies on display. So they're already disadvantaged. They were in the lunatic asylum, which at the time, trans-Allegheny, you could get put in there for menstruation, reading a novel, anything, if you were disagreeing with your husband. So who knows how these poor women got in there. This guy experiments on them. And at one point, you know, they have a flood and they lose the baby, or it gets damaged enough that it was buried in the cemetery. No longer connected with the baby. But for $1, you can take a peek at these mummies that are being kept on display at this museum, never repatriated, in the bathroom. And I was like, how is this? I mean, no disrespect, but like maybe because it's so remote in West Virginia that nobody's ever reassessed what's going on there. But I'm like, they definitely.
I've never even heard of these things. Yeah, I never even heard of these remains, these mummies. I've never heard of this story. This is crazy. And I was just out in that area a couple of years ago. I wish
it's like, do you look or do you not look? But honestly, the story still exists. It's still incredible, but wouldn't it be more incredible to repatriate them and at least give them?
Yeah, that's what I was going to ask you. You would know this, if anyone would, because your background. Is there, maybe they could come up with some idea, they could come up with some idea where, like, it's a cemetery, but it's a cemetery to put, like, repatriated remains where it's like, look, we can't track this down. So we can confirm it's a human skull, and we can give it a dignified burial, like the arm that someone sent to you. Like, if there was a place, not a shelf, but like a field somewhere, like a cemetery, but a place for, you call it a place for dignified burials, where you could just put these body parts, bury these body parts, and sort of put them back into the earth where perhaps they should go?
Well, so some places, especially with modern medical donation, will have a garden for something like that. The problem is, in order to make a burial at consecrated grounds that are a cemetery, like a legal cemetery, you have to have a death certificate. In order to obtain a death certificate, you have to at least make some sort of attempt to identify the person. So you would have to take them to a university, and that's how Fortune was examined. They took him to a university in Connecticut, and an expert was like, this is who this is, and this is the origin. So they can tell approximately the ethnicity and origin of the remains to some degree, but there's no way to know for sure who it was, especially because there's probably not a DNA sample. Even if there was, the DNA would be so fragmented, and it's just not possible to even, really look into forensics. And maybe it is in some scenarios, like the mummies, possibly. I mean, there's tissue there, but at some point, this is where I actually mention this kind of stuff when I find a story like this. And like I said, I had heard of these mummies, and I mentioned to 3 other people, I said, did you know that they were just asylum patients? They were just humans that were already like given such a hard life. And now people pay $1 to peek at them like it's a sideshow. So I hope to see that someday. I hope to see a dignified thing. Like it maybe it won't be, everyone gets a headstone, but what about a chapel and some sort of identifier, or at least a marker or something like that? I think with the personal, like the private ownership of these remains, it gets too close into the territory of them being photo shoot props. And you cannot tell me that to some degree, even if it's a retired medical specimen, that using human remains as photo shoot props or home decor at some point is going to create a dissonance between that person, the identity of that person, and how we are reverent toward them. Yeah. So that's where I think maybe, like I said, I'm a little harsh on this, but at the same time, I just think that like everyone deserves dignity. Everyone deserves respect. And I think anyone who's been in the paranormal field for a long time knows how many of these stories start with wanting to be remembered or wanted to be respected. And do I think in any capacity that being displayed next to the bathroom is respectful? There's no way. And I know that people will say that's not cool, that they're fun, they're quirky, it's a roadside attraction. And it's like
tradition, right? That's the
right, exactly. We've been doing it for 50 years or, at this point, it's like, when is it enough? It's like, but we look at Egyptian mummies and it's like, oh, that was 4,000 years ago. And that's fine. They're, but what point are we robbing ourselves, our ability to say that's what we did in 1880? But I do think it was also someone who was an experiment. It's an outlier. So it wasn't like tradition. It's not our culture. It's just something that, oops, it happened.
Right. Well, anyone who has skeletons, they should agree. They should put it down. It's like, when I die, I'm going to be a skeleton. I give full consent to be a skeleton, to be owned, and
that's illegal. We're not,
it's illegal.
Yeah, you actually legally cannot designate your remains to be in private ownership.
Wow! Look at that.
It's really weird.
Folks. I broke the law.
They will do anything. They'll tax you to death. Like, you are not allowed to die without so many, things, even the death certificate. Like, there's so many formalities. And so there is that. But, and there's another story that comes up a lot that I think about. But there was an Egyptian mummy that was sold during the mummy madness phase, and he was the 2-year-old son of a pharaoh. His name was Amener Khepeshef. And this guy buys him for his little rinky-dink, small local museum. And when he gets there, he's angry that he's not in good enough condition. So he puts this little mummy in the attic, and they didn't find him until the 50s. This guy discovers this mummy in the attic. And so what they decide to do is cremate him with a local furnace, and they put him in a cemetery and they give him a Christian burial. And so there's an ankh and also a cross on his grave. Now, Egyptians felt that if your entire remains were not intact, you wouldn't be able to carry them with you in the afterlife, which explains the canopic jars. So now we have this 2-year-old son of a pharaoh that is buried in Vermont. And that's one of the first things that made me think about, like, at what point, do we need to consider consent? And we also need to consider, cultural traditions and not impose our values onto other people. And that's one that always was like, we can't do anything now. I'm sure that would never happen today. We would never just cremate a mummy and bury him, a Christian burial at that. And
Right.
A lot of people were really offended. They said, how could they do that? I'm like, they didn't know.
I feel like it's wrong in ways, but at the same time, it's like they meant the very best by their actions.
They didn't have Google.
I mean? Yeah, they were like, what do we do with this thing? And they were like, let's give this baby the best burial that we as Vermont Christians know how to do. So
exactly. It's what they put all their faith into. So that's what they believed. And it is a total shame, of course. Like today they would try to repatriate it. Like I said, you can't just put a head in the box and send it back, It's just an interesting thing. And I think we're going to see a lot more with that. I think we're going to see a lot more legislation when it comes to human remains. I probably, have seen personally people that I know, at least a dozen of them that have mummy remains in their house, like private ownership, like a piece of a mummy. I don't know. And it's just something that I think about a lot. And I was over at a friend's house. He's like, have you ever smelled a mummy? And then like, he let me know. And he's like, they have a smell, and they do. It's like it's a leather, like kind of incense-y kind of smell. And I was like, that's crazy, because this person lived 4,000 years ago and now their head's in your house.
Yeah, it's pretty wild. Can you give me a little more than 90 minutes?
Yeah.
All right, cool. So take me through a paranormal investigation generally, because I'm going to be doing one later this year. I rarely do them. I'd like to do more. I may do more. But I'm always sort of fascinated by the folks that do, because it's like watching an athlete or something. Because like I don't know which way to stand. I don't know. I don't have the footwork down. So what do you, on an average, sort of, you go to check out a place, what do you do?
If you hear that a house is haunted, you take a set of matches and you show up and you burn it down. And that's it. No. So for my paranormal investigations, I'm still like getting closer and closer to what I think works for me. And I think the number one thing is only enter the environment with people that you're 100% on the same page with. So I'm going to, with whoever is involved, do some sort of like grounding or opening ritual, whatever that looks like to your practices. And if you don't have a spiritual practice, just something sort of like a group breathing exercise, because you really want to make sure that there's no discord. And discord is the number one thing that I see happening with these content creators who are just getting into it. And I can tell you there are probably 8 or 9 stories of a bunch of content creators meeting up and expecting to have a really good night investigating, and one of them having like a panic attack, or someone else feeling like someone thinks they're better. I've been on the other end of this, and it truly comes from not knowing what the other person's intent. So you set your intentions, you set your goals, you have a game plan, and communicate the entire time. As far as the actual investigation goes, you're going to want the insight from whoever's making the claims. And I'll be honest, I did a lot of the pay to play investigations. I still enjoy, especially if there's a special event, but I'm really on the page of starting from the ground up. I think it's the best way to, allow myself to explore the paranormal without other people's whispers in the ears. So the last investigation I did, I sat down with the owner and I said, what's going on in your house? What are your experiences? And she told me, my house might be a little bit haunted. It's not, too haunted. And it ended up being the most like activity that I'd ever documented. And it was like tangible activity with the equipment. So, I think you kind of start with your intuition, and I would never recommend outsourcing your intuition, which is something I used to do. So I don't know. It's different for everyone. So I was working with a medium, and I had them kind of like pushing me and leading me in the directions. And now I'm kind of like, if I feel a certain way, I want to try something. And that's how we ended up yielding the best thing. Is I kind of put myself in the shoes of what was going on in the history and what made sense for the history. So the last specific place I was at was the claims were just like wild. I can't even get past it, but it was supposed to be the first and last place of the Whiskey Rebellion. And so the way we yielded some really cool results is I said, let's go. And it was Amanda Paulson and I said, let's go into the basement, try and embody the spirit of the Whiskey Rebellion. Now, the Whiskey Rebellion is this time period in Pennsylvania where these farmers, they got so angry with the tax collector that they decided they were going to tar and feather him. And I said, we're frustrated. We're not getting the activity the way we think it's supposed to manifest. And so we went to the basement and we started just like going all out and getting angry. And that's when we start seeing, I was like, can you make a sound? And I was like, can you make a knock? And we hear this loud knock. And then everyone's like, we feel this sensation of someone being in the room, and it all just kind of lit up from there. So I think I was holding myself back from wanting to try and experiment with these things. And then I realized that again, you have to follow your intuition. And the other thing I'll say is when you're going into an investigation, give yourself time. So I don't know if I believe in the overnight investigations anymore as much as I do immersing yourself in a house for a week or 2 weeks. Or, with this house, it was a couple days, but I could have spent a week here. And when we're going into the house, we're trying to document with these tools, but all the activity that was happening was outside the tools. So the owner of the house forgets her car keys, but then she finds a 100-year-old skeleton key. It was like a time slip. And then the water started running black and she's like, oh my gosh, the house is attacking, and she leaves. And then, we have these other people who were there. The camera guy comes down and he has a 3-inch scratch on his neck. And I was like, Chris, how did you get that scratch on your neck? And he was like, oh, nothing. I don't believe in that. And I was like, Chris, it's like 3 inches long. You didn't just scratch yourself. Like it's like a long scratch. And he was like, no, I don't believe in it. I was like, okay. So I think the best way, like for me at this point to investigate, is to document everything, even if it seems insignificant. Immerse yourself in an environment, and anything that changes, even if it's not a piece of equipment lighting up or, a full body apparition. And then when the whole picture comes together, it starts to make a little more sense. So we finished this investigation. That's the other thing. Don't confine those investigations to the house, and don't write the story right as soon as you leave the house. You have to look at it and process it for a few days and go, whoa, that was something else. So we wrap up the investigation and we end up writing the sigil on this door that we closed, because the door ended up being relevant to the story. It was like, so, people felt like these weird feelings about the door. Yeah. So we're like, we're going to close the door. We say this incantation and we write a sigil on the door. And Amanda Paulson and I are walking down to the bridge in this middle of nowhere ghost town in Pennsylvania. And a man stops in front of us. And in that moment, he didn't seem like a person. I thought we were going to get stabbed. And it was like, oh, Jesus. He just was vacant. Like there was a vacant expression. And so I step off the sidewalk and think this guy's going to get us. And then he passes us, and it was if he was not himself, but a vessel for this message. And he said, did you shut that door? And I looked at Amanda. Oh my God. Yeah, and I looked at Amanda and I was like, did we shut the door? And we're like, did the magic we tried to do work? And actually, earlier today, I get a message from the owner of the house. This has now been 6 months. And she said, the sigil's gone from the door. So I think I have to go back. But my point is, I don't think there's a plan. I thought there was. I thought there was you have this person go in and he's the medium and he's going to point you in the direction, intuition, or you can read some tarot cards and they'll tell you where to go. And then you're going to get out your REM pod. No, Like, just experience it. Allow yourself to exist in that space and record everything, even if you think it doesn't matter at what time it happened. Like, it was just, that was my big mess up those couple of days, because I was like, how do you record stuff that's not on the, how do you record stuff that's not on the stuff that we're supposed to show? And I know that there's going to be a documentary coming out, and it is not going to represent what we experienced, with the guy. And it was the electricity, the electricity in the house. It sits on this limestone and it's pulsing this, like, the lights are going on and off. And I'm like, oh, it's just old electricity. But then I look in the basement and there's the brown scapular. Someone tried to put exorcism pamphlets on the electrical box. That's how much they had felt and put power into this electrical stuff. And they had someone come in and look at it, and they said, there's no electrical problems. So why is this happening? Then we go to our Airbnb we're staying at, and there's an electrical fault and the circuit goes out. And then we have the owner of the Airbnb come and turn on the kitchen lights after that happened. And they said, did you bring anything from the tavern, which was the place we were investigating? So we're like, is this following us? And then Amanda and I, after all of this, we go to get dinner together outside in a completely different town. And we're sitting there eating at this restaurant I've eaten probably 50 times over the years, and the lights go out. And I'm like, what point are you walking around as like this beacon for like electrical failure that you have to go, this is part of the investigation? So I think that allowing yourself to be open-minded in every context and just trying to document anything. Like, yes, the scientific stuff matters too, but also your intuition is telling you maybe that does mean a little bit more. And I understand, like, the water running black. I was like, oh, it's just the water running black. But then when the water runs black and the electrical's going crazy and someone gets a random scratch on their body, and I'm like, why is this chaos happening right now?
Yeah.
So that was one of the strangest investigations. And actually, I need to let Amanda know after we get off this chat, hey, by the way, our sigil's gone.
That's wild. Now, when the guy, so he was walking down the sidewalk, and you guys were walking. Oh, and when he said, did you close the door? And then he just kept walking?
Yep.
Weird.
And we said, we're not from here. And then we ran away. Because we didn't know what to say.
That's a good answer, I guess. Yeah, we're not from here.
We're not from here. But
oh my God.
And I told someone that story, and they're like, so they planted someone? I'm like, no, it happened. But I still think about it, and I'm like, I didn't close the door. Actually, after we closed the door, we heard like someone like scooting their feet in the corner, getting closer and closer to us. And so you have Amanda and I standing against the wall, and we're just hearing shh, shh.
Oh, Jesus Christ.
And I was like, hey, the house is still active. And she was like, I know. but there's nothing you could do. Sometimes hauntings don't need to be healed. There's not an answer. I don't know what to tell you. That house is haunted. I think it's haunted. I rarely say that, but I'm like, it's haunted. I don't know why, and I don't know how to fix it.
Wild. Yeah. Speaking of, I got one more here, and then we'll get into the plugs. But we got one more talking point here. Very interesting to me. It's a deep cut. I apologize, but I have a feeling once I mention this, you'll know exactly what I'm talking about, because it's pretty unique. You were talking about haunted objects that you own, and you showcased this haunted Mickey Mouse clock.
Yes, the clock,
and with an incredible story behind it. When I was so blown away, and we're talking about it now. I'm like, write that down. That was kind of my reaction when I saw the video with this clock and the story behind it. Can you tell us about this?
So I am not a haunted object collector. I don't seek haunted objects, and people keep dumping them on me for some reason. It's like, hey, this reminds me of you. So I was on a buy. I was at an auction house in New Paltz, New York, and the guy, we were just talking, he's the kindest guy ever. You know, he's been dealing forever, and he deals in small end things and things that are tens of thousands of dollars. And usually people on the high end of auction houses like that are not very kind or human, but this guy, he is. And so we were talking for hours about antiques, and I was loading a coffin into my car, and he said, you know, I have something if you like haunted things that you might be interested. No pressure. You don't have to take it. It won't cost any money. It's a clock. And I said, well, what do you mean it's a clock? And so he's like, I'll tell you the story, but let me show it to you. So he brings us to the back, and I'm noticing things stacked up, and he apologizes for the mess, and he shows us, and it's almost like a barn setup, and he takes us around a corner, and there's a countertop. It's a couple cabinets, and it's sitting on the countertop, and the light is shining from the ceiling, and it was like a movie because there's the spotlight that just directly shines on this clock, which is now covered in cobwebs. And I thought, if that's a haunted object, if I've ever seen one, you know, it's lit, it's illuminated. It looks like it's like you take it and the whole world starts shaking around you.
Right,
it was so strange. And he said, a woman brought it to him when she was bringing in other items to sell. Her father made it while he was incarcerated at Sing Sing prison, and he was a mass murderer. And she left a fake number. So after the other things had sold, you know, they did everything, and she left the number, and he could never return it because she gave a fake number to him. So she clearly never wanted it back. And it's a clock that's made out of popsicle sticks. It's definitely made in prison, and it's probably 50 or 60 years old at this point, and it has Mickey Mouse, but also Donald Duck. Like, it's like kind of Looney Tunes, and then it, you know, you have Bugs Bunny. Like it's a combination. So it's layered. It has kind of a jewelry box and you know, something, a drawer underneath, and it opens up, and it's kind of strange because it has all these little storage spaces, and it has that heavy story because it was made by the hands who took a bunch of lives. Yeah. And when he said, you know, nobody wanted it, he can't sell it. It's not like valuable in that way. I mean,
like
I'm sure
quirky, like a hand. Yeah. It's like handmade art. Yeah. It's not.
Some people have offered to buy it for the history at some points and stuff. And I've sat on it a long time and thought about what the fate of the clock should be. He said that it had been at the auction house for over 10 years, which is, I mean, it had cobwebs all over it. He certainly was telling the truth there. And he just never knew what to do. It didn't feel right to sell. He didn't want to get rid of it. And then it was like in that moment, like we were meant to take that clock that day. He said other employees didn't even know the story. He never told them. He just held on to the backstory. And those other employees, they avoided it, and it's just a Mickey Mouse clock. They didn't even know what it was, and they didn't want to be around it. So you have to think about the complexity and the layers there. This is a clock that was made for someone that maybe felt guilty that he couldn't be there for his daughter, or he's making a gift for his daughter out of obligation because he has nothing else to do. He's sitting in prison. And so is the daughter feeling resentment for the father that she was missing? What was going on? Like, was she haunted by it? Like, was that why she wanted to get rid of it? Or was she feeling resentful for it? Why didn't she just donate it? Why did it end up in this auction house?
Why did she keep it for so long? Right?
There's so many questions. And it was the first thing, like we set it in between us in the U-Haul we had rented. And it was the first time I was like, maybe I should have brought that home. And then I thought for the first couple of months that I had the clock, I thought, should I even tell its story? And then I thought, should I dismantle it? Should I take it apart? Is that the answer? Does the pain end with that? What is it? And there was a time where I was on live and I was just talking and the clock opens. So I've created this conspiracy theory that if I leave the clock closed, it won't bother me. But it's one of those things, I just try not to give it too much energy. I don't talk about it as much as the other objects. So it's one thing to have like some dolls that, affected people, or, I'm surrounded by allegedly haunted things that people send me, and it's endless. People, they'll say, are you open to taking haunted objects? Like is business open? But it's the one thing that I'm like, it's like a burden. It's like a mole. I'm like, I have this clock that it has the worst story I've ever heard. And I don't collect murderabilia. And so, it's sitting in the corner. Sometimes I feel like it can see me, but in the first couple of weeks I had it, I just felt like this like sadness, because you think about it, it's like, so that's why it's like, there's the clock and it exists with me for as long as it needs to. I thought about taking it apart, but then I thought, well, maybe that story needs to be told, like what it's like to be, and it's not my story, but like what it's like to be a family member of someone who did something like that, and what a gift from someone like that means. It's not like, the murder weapon. I know a lot of people get into stuff like that. It's just this clock, and it has that story.
It was a deeply personal art project for this miscreant, and it's like, it means something. There's a deep meaning imbued in that thing. I don't know. I wouldn't take it apart. I wish the lady would get in touch with you and be like, hey, here's my story. But clearly she didn't want anything to do with it anymore. So, well,
we don't even know if she's alive, because it
was 10 years ago. Yeah.
Well, I think he said it was like 14 years ago. Like it was a while ago. And then on top of it, like it was already, the clock is like 50, 60 years old. Like it's old. But it's just, you can tell with the primary colors and stuff. And the thing is, like, I am all for second chances and, prison reform and giving people understanding. But when it's someone who's taken multiple lives.
Yeah. Like serial killer. Yeah. It's like.
Yeah. It's like a bit more complicated than that. And trying not to glorify it, because what if there is someone out there that like is associated with that? So it's just, people don't understand. I think, you see a lot of accounts on social media and they're like, oh, I have these haunted objects. It's so fun. And it's like, do you know the things people give me? I have a ring over here in the corner that someone thought gave them cancer. I have a clock made by.
Why would they give that to you? Why would they? If I had something that I thought gave me cancer, I wouldn't be like, hey, Beckie-Ann, here, have this.
So like, make sure you give them attention. And then we have, this bear over here that's covered in crosses. And it's just like this depth of things that, it's layered. It doesn't matter if there's a ghost involved or not. I'm carrying all these heavy stories for people. And it's the same as funeral service in a way, because I'm not, picking up a decedent and hearing the story of the decedent and how they are grieving, but I am hearing the story of how this object took on this life after these people brought it home and how it affected them. And a lot of times it is like illness and stuff. And it's like, I don't hang out in this room that I'm talking in. I think people are like, ooh, spooky, like haunted objects. Like, that's so fun. Like, it'd be cool to have a haunted doll. It's like, no, most of them are just like regular objects with really heavy stories that weigh on your heart. So,
yeah. Well, we'll talk about something a little more uplifting here as we head towards the end of our conversation. And this is something that I noticed you were doing sometime last year. I don't know. I noticed it caught my eye, and I'm like, I want to get one of these eventually. These are the haunted mystery boxes that you make. These fantastic, I don't even know what piece, artwork. It's artwork, folks. It's like artwork. It's so much thought is put into it. Into these pieces. So talk about the haunted mystery boxes, where this came up, how, what's in them, how people can get one. She's not rolling them out like cars off the assembly line, folks. These are curated really awesome packages, I guess you could say. So on that note, what are talk us about the haunted mystery boxes?
So it started as this little idea of I wanted to make people feel like they were opening a junk drawer in a haunted house. So nothing that was like terribly expensive, and a way for people to have access to the things that they like that I have, but at an affordable, accessible way, you know, like
right.
in a way that it was there. And sometimes people don't even know what they're looking for until it's put right in front of them. And I think it's one thing to go on eBay and type in antique cabinet card or antique picture, but when it's chosen for you, it feels a little bit more special. I initially did 7 and they sold out in an hour. And I was like, people are paying attention to what I'm doing. This is wild. And then I started doing 25 at a time and they'd sell out in a day. So it's at the point where I've done 200 of them. And what they are is a little bit of everything. So you get antique photos of people, and there's so many of these photos that don't have identification. And again, they're chosen for you. It's like a tarot deck. It's like, it's in your hands now. And it started with a memento mori. So I was doing like funeral cabinet cards, but then it got to the point where they wanted the human hair. So it's usually identified human hair that's over 100 years old. So sometimes I have to, that's the holdup with the listings, is I'm looking for identified human hair that's 100 years old. and I put it in bags with ribbons, and then a piece of a haunted location. So it'll be a piece of a brick or wallpaper or something, just something small for people who can't travel. And I make sure to print out newspaper clippings. So it really just puts context in there. One of my favorite things to find is I find old postcards for haunted locations. So, you have postcards for the Alamo and the Crescent Hotel and all of these places that have these ominous stories, but the way they were advertised in like the 20s and 30s, where it's like this bright, brilliant place to go, and it doesn't look like spooky the way we see it. I'm trying to think of some of the ones that I came across. Oh, West Virginia Penitentiary, which is solely a haunted attraction now. And I found a postcard for it the other day, and I was like, this is amazing. So the Hotel Cecil, I found a postcard from there. And that is one of the things I've really been passionate about now, because it started little collectors that have been inspired by these boxes. And then the last thing that I put in there, so I put the pictures, 2 pictures and the human hair. So I have a little business of distributing old human hair, a postcard from a haunted location or a piece of ephemera, some seashells. And that's just so like, it's just like a whole curiosity. Like I said, with everything has like a little story. And the last thing is my one that I really have a lot of fun with it. It's a trinket or object, mystery object. And sometimes it's a skeleton key, and sometimes it's like the most disgusting doll that I could find. And people open it, and it's like, as you open the box, the eyes open, and they all come with a disclaimer that I'm not saying these things are haunted, but if something haunted happens, it's also not my fault. But if you feel like you want to send it back, I can take it back, which has happened. I've had people open them and say they felt energy. I don't know if it comes from me or my house. Like it's taken a whole life of its own, but it's also become, it is really like a labor intensive project, but at the same time, like I said, it's like an experience for people, and I've learned to get really good at it. I've learned to be really frugal in a way. So everyone's always like, you should charge more, but I found a way to like obtain these objects, in a way that I'm not really like spending as much as they're worth. So I am spending money, but I wait now. I used to try and get them all out at once, but now I'm like, oh, I found this doll and I know it's worth like $40 or whatever, but I put it in a box and it's like I found it for $3, but I try to pass along the good deals because it is hard to break into collecting. And Also, the boxes are balanced in a way so I don't just throw random each category. I make it so if you took everything out of the box, you could put it in a display and it would all make sense together.
Right.
And so it's just really been kind of like a scavenger hunt. It's been fun. There are postcards that I put in boxes that I still think about. Like there was one from the Hoosac Tunnel and it was glittered. It had like glitter on it. And I was like, that's so funny because they call it the Bloody Pit. And there's like a glittery postcard from there.
Well, they're fantastic. As I said, I think I saw you posted, you were making one or you'd finished one or whatever, and you posted about it on Twitter, and I was like, that is the coolest thing. And then I was looking more at what you do, and I was like, this is art. This is art, what she's doing. I don't know what you'd call it, but it's like some kind of collection. It's amazing.
Yeah, it's curation.
Curation. Yeah, curation.
It's like a miniature version of what I collect. And
yeah.
I often say with the boxes, I wish someone else offered the boxes so I could experience it myself from someone else, because I do really enjoy the idea of it. And like I said, with the haunted stuff, there are other oddities, mystery boxes and stuff, but it's something like that. But to be honest, I'm so busy in the capacity. Like I never thought I'd have an idea, and now I've sold 200. Like
right.
It really has become, a big thing for me.
Yeah, it's awesome. So you got some appearances coming up as we close out the latter half of the year. You got them in front of you. You want to plug them? I got some here. I think I got Michigan Paracon. I got Strange Escapes Cruise, but there's also one down in Disney, I think, right?
So I'm pretty sure I'm the first TikToker to ever be on Michigan Paracon.
Congratulations.
That to me was like, so I'm really excited to be there for that one. So I will be there. I also am doing a Disney event in September. It's actually my birthday weekend that all that's going on with Aaron Sagers and Shane Pittman. And we're kind of doing a paranormal Disney thing with some lectures and some tiki stuff. So that's going to be fun. And then the last, thing coming up is the Strange Escapes cruise with Amy and Adam and Steve and Tenny. So it's a week-long cruise, and I'll be giving my lecture. So it's a pretty big stacked couple of weeks for me, because I'm going to be going to Disney and doing that event and immediately doing the cruise, and it's really going to be a lot of fun. So I'm looking forward to seeing some of the people. There's people I see at all of them, and it's like they start to become like, it's like, oh, I can't wait to see you again.
You see him. Yeah, you see him like 1 or 2 times a year or 3 times, and it's like, yeah, it's cool. It's a great feeling.
But it's my first Michigan, so I'm really excited about that as well. So
it's quite a conference. I heard it's one of the bigger ones. So I've never been up there, but I'd like to check it out sometime.
Yeah, well, they said that this may be the end of it. So last chance. So, but either way, I was still just like, at least that's it, because like
then you might be the only TikToker who ever spoke at the Michigan Paracon. Think of it that way. You'd be like even more historic. No, I think it's funny you say that, because to me it's like this reminds me in a way of like podcasting, where at first when I was coming up, it was like, oh, he's a fucking podcaster. He's a podcaster. He doesn't know what he's talking about. He's a podcaster. He hasn't even written a book. It's like, man, this is how we do it now.
Yeah, exactly.
This is how we do it. So, and I see you, Amanda Paulson, and all these other folks, and I'm just kind of like standing on the road and waving, going, all right, that's how let the kids go, man. That's how they're doing it now. That's how they're doing
exactly. Yeah. And you know what? Amy Bruni has been like one of the biggest cheerleaders for like accepting the change and like really supporting us creators, because it hasn't always been like that. Like sometimes the YouTubers, because they're still putting out long format, but she was one of the first people to be like, yeah, you guys are on the right track. Like as long as you're doing the right thing and having integrity, like it, and letting us really like shine and be accepted as more than just influencers.
Yeah. Well, you said that earlier. This did pop into my mind. I didn't want to ask about it, because you said that you kind of have a group of friends and you're of the influencers in the scene, and it's like, and you sort of try to do best practices. What would you say best practices is for that realm of media, if you will?
Crediting where you're finding the work you're doing, because a lot of content creators don't credit and they're taking other people's research. I see that a lot. I see a lot of creators that just like take someone's book and then they regurgitate it. being as diligent as you can and honest as you can with your evidence. If you're presenting evidence, at this point, I don't know if evidence has the capacity to exist on social media because, again, it lacks context and nuance and other things. And, for example, like I would approximate the stories I was telling. So I would say, it is said that this is, but some of the legends, especially, it's 5 different versions in the same scenario. And then the other thing that I really got into after my first year was starting to actually do the research and not provide any information unless I could find a newspaper archive or something to back it up. Because there's a lot of things that have been retold on these green and black 20-year-old pages that tell these ghost stories, and they've never verified. So there are a lot of creators that are starting to get into, getting into the newspapers, getting into going to libraries and working with their local historical societies. So that's what I mean is like, it's never going to be perfect.
Right.
We're always going to be the paranormal. We're always going to be weird. There's always going to be different ways to do things. But I think, again, like there's the people who are really trying, and then there's people that are putting the same clickbait article from 4 years ago and going, look at this. And instead of trying to at least debunk some aspect, because I think sometimes you can debunk or fact check and still have an amazing story come out.
Absolutely. Yeah. Yeah. Essentially, don't be shady and don't try and take shortcuts. That would be kind of my, that would be my best practice.
It's finally catching up to people. That's what I've noticed is at first it was like, look at all these people faking stuff and they're just growing. And now they're kind of, it's hitting a wall. The plateau has kind of done that. And the people who have really tried, at least done their best. I'm still learning. That's the hard part of being on social media is that I posted stuff 4 years ago that I wouldn't post today, but it's out there and that exists. So you're watching us grow. You're watching us be human. You're on our journey with us.
Exactly. Yeah. I've been kind of saying that about Binnall America for all these years. It's like, look, I did shows way back when. I don't know, that was a completely different guy. That was
exactly. And it's still out in the internet.
Yeah. All right. With all that said, if folks want to find out more about Beckie-Ann and jump into the Beckie-Ann universe, that's the best way to put it. Go put in your Google machine, My Bloody Galentine. I could say also Linktree. I get the thing. It's like linktr.ee. So it's like, I can't keep up anymore.
It's okay. Yeah.
My Bloody Galentine. I love the whole. It's the perfect brand. It's your real last name. I'm sure you've gotten this question before.
Oh, I get that a lot. I was just going to say I get that a lot. It's not a pseudonym, though. My real last name is Galentine, but the Galentine origin is the Parks and Rec episode is the first time Galentine's Day was a thing. So I predate that, but now that that's become such a popular thing, people think My Bloody Galentine is like, and then Beckie-Ann Galentine is a pseudonym. And I'm like, no, it was my name, but it wasn't incredible 20 years ago. But now everyone thinks it's amazing. At first it was like, oh, it's like Valentine with a G, but now Galentine's.
Yeah, now it's become its own word. Yeah.
And it's frustrating because I always say I try to find like old family photos and stuff or like maybe family history that's out there. And I can't because it's inundated with like Staples pencil bags that say Galentine. Like,
yeah, that would fuck up your your research into your background. Well, with all that said, as I said, My Bloody Galentine, punch it in Google, you'll find it. You got one of those. I saw you and Amanda joking about it on Twitter because, like, when I was trying to get all the links and everything, I put in your name, and you got like one of those little cards. It's like internet personality. It's like, oh, come on, dude.
I know that those just show up too, and I don't know, like there's no rhyme or reason for it, and like and it'll randomly change the picture. And the one picture that haunts me is one I did as a promo for the vampire ball I was doing, and now it's everywhere. It's like every single event that I do, they use that one, and I'm like, oh god, can that picture please just disappear?
There you go. Well, folks listening, if you book Beckie-Ann, don't use the photo. But I feel like we could talk for a long time. I hope I can get you back on the show sometime in the future. I'd love to do one with you and Amanda. I think we would have a blast, the three of us.
Yeah, absolutely.
And there's so much more we could get into. I really find your take on all this so refreshing. As I said, you're remarkably candid. All this time I've seen you in the media, and I'm like, I'd like to. Like, who is this Beckie-Ann Galentine? She's everywhere. I'm just amazed. Where'd she come from? She came out of nowhere. It's like I've been so fascinated and so just really on the edge of my seat here, hearing your story and how you got into all this and the experience that you've had. And for anyone out there, Beckie-Ann Galentine, she's a paranormal investigator. Her medium is TikTok, and that's it. She's not a influencer. She's not trying to sell you soap or anything like that. Respect her medium, folks. It's the next generation. It's the next wave. It's what's coming down the pike here in this long history of the paranormal. She's going to carry this thing over the next, for a lot of us. So, and she knows how to do it. So thank you so much. It's been a great pleasure, and I look forward to hopefully us chatting again in the future.
Thank you. Yeah, we'll definitely do this again sometime, especially with Amanda. It would be really fun.